This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 3 minutes after 10. Very good morning to you. I did something a bit strange yesterday. I feel I should confess. I looked up Marc Francois on Wikipedia. Two things quite interesting about Marc Francois. His middle name is Gino. Did you know that? Gino, because his mum's Italian. It's amazing how many of these people who are absolutely passionately opposed to immigration would not be here in this generation were it not for immigration. But that's a conversation for another day. And the reason why I looked him up was because I'd caught myself doing him a disservice. And it's very important to acknowledge when you do disservices to people. You know who Marc Francois is. People often compare him to Penfold out of Danger Mouse, which I don't think is particularly insulting. Penfold was a lovely character. In many ways, a better character than Danger Mouse himself. But he cuts a slightly comical figure. He kind of, I don't know why. It's not very nice to be lookist, but he does cut a comical figure. Whether intentionally or not, I could not say. But I was going to use him as a shining example of how low we have been brought in recent years, of how shallow the talent puddle is for the current iteration of the Tory party. You know that the elevation of people like Nadine Dorries and Jacob Rees-Mogg to the cabinet, when once they would have been treated with a sort of bemused affection as backbench eccentrics by both colleagues, media and public alike. But the madness of Brexit created an opening for people who were detached from reality to thrive. Being detached from reality became almost a prerequisite for advancement in Boris Johnson's various administrations, and latterly, of course, in Liz Truss's brief foray at the top of the political Christmas tree, and now Rishi Sunak's. The closer, the more allied you are, or the more outspoken you are about objective reality, the less likely you are to thrive in the current iteration of the Conservative Party. And I was going to use Marc Francois as an example of that. I was going to say, can you imagine a better exemplar of the sort of flotsam and jetsam that now achieves influence and prominence on the right of British politics than Marc Francois? But I was doing him a disservice, because it turns out, and this is why I checked on Wikipedia, it turns out that he was given ministerial posts as long ago as David Cameron's premiership. So the idea that it was simply the bonkers nature of Brexit that propelled an odd and comical character like Marc Francois to the forefront of political discourse is simply not true. I don't know whether Cameron threw him a bone in order to sort of quell the Eurosceptic whining that emerged from him presumably back in the day, but it is unfair to put him on the list of people whose prominence can be owed to the national detachment from reality undertaken in 2016. But it is very odd, isn't it, when you see him popping up on the telly again? A sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Is he a pooterish figure? A pooterish figure? A sort of, I mean, you don't look at Marc Francois and feel either inspired or confident that the country is in safe hands. Here is a man seeking to scupper the course being set by a prime minister who's bad enough, but the idea that a course being set by a prime minister could somehow be scuppered by Marc Gino Francois, as I think we should call him, to give him his full name. It is a mark of the madness that the country is still engulfed in. You're sort of turning to, and do you know what they call themselves? I wish I could say to you that when I heard this, I didn't believe it. I wish I could say to you, so you know that yesterday we ran through the various groupings of Tories who can't agree with each other, even though they're on the same page when it comes to immigration and Rwanda and the rest of it. It's a little bit People's Front of Judea. I don't know if you remember that scene from Life of Brian, the rather splendid Monty Python film. It's a wonderful pastiche of leftist splintering, actually. It's usually left-wing groups that splinter into passionately opposed to each other over where you put a colon on the posters, or tiny little points of difference. So you have the People's Front of Judea and the Judean People's Front, and they all believe in the same thing, but they've fallen out over some small arcane item of rhetoric or policy, and they all sort of shout splitters at each other and stuff like that. It's usually I think it was, I'd have to check with John Cleese, I suppose, but I think it was aimed at left-wing splintering, which has always been more commonplace than right-wing splintering. But we are not living through normal times, and so this splitting of anti-immigration or anti-everything really, anti-Doris groups. There are 5 identifiable groups, and I wish I could say to you that when I heard that they refer to themselves as the 5 families, a nod to, I think, Mario Puzo's Godfather series, a nod to mafiosi nomenclature. I wish I could tell you that I didn't believe it, but I just thought, yeah, I bet they do. I bet they refer to themselves as the 5 families. Luca Brasi sleeps with the fishes. It's quite extraordinary, the gulf between how we see them and how they see themselves. But as I do actually explain in my new book, How They Broke Britain, the ecosystem that's been created by right-wing politicians, right-wing media and right-wing think tanks means that people like Mark Francois can look in the mirror and somehow persuade themselves that Al Pacino is looking back. That is the extraordinary thing about the distorted lens of our public and political discourse in this country. Somebody like Mark Francois can look in the mirror and see Michael Corleone looking back at him. And so, of course, they call themselves the 5 families. These people called themselves the Spartans. You know, the Spartans used to throw disabled babies off cliffs because they would not grow to be valid contributors to the military kingdom that Sparta represented, that Sparta was. And this lot boasted that they saw themselves as Spartans. Spartans. Mark Francois at the Battle of Thermopylae, anybody? Can you see it? In full, like, breastplate. Well, he wouldn't even have breastplates. He'd be wearing a sort of leather jerkin and wielding an axe. Can you see Mark Francois as a Spartan? Anyone? Yeah, Mark Francois can. And now they see themselves as mafiosi. Mafiosi. And it is almost unbearably pathetic what has happened to British politics. There's a doctor's strike next week, junior doctor's strike next week. I don't know if you've tried to travel by train lately. I don't know if you have been on the Elizabeth line when it's sort of taken an unscheduled 6-hour stop in the middle of a tunnel, which happened earlier this week or late last week. We've got cost of living crisis continuing to push families to the brink of penury. A proliferation, of course, of food banks continues, and warm banks have presumably made a bit of a comeback now that the weather's turned. You've got water companies pumping unconscionable amounts of sewage into our waterways and apparently getting away with it. You've got a COVID inquiry underway where it's becoming increasingly clear not only that Johnson and Dr. Death, Rishi Sunak, presided over all manner of avoidable deaths, but also that they're just going to deny it. They're just going to play the shaggy defence. It wasn't me, the pair of them. If they haven't been in contact with each other, Sunak, Johnson and Matt Hancock, then I'm a Spartan. But that's all going on, and none of it matters because everyone's focused on Rwanda. Boris Johnson's ludicrous attempt to feed red meat to the racist base of his own party, both within Parliament and without, doomed to failure from the very start, and finessed and improved and tweaked and squeaked by subsequent Prime Minister, by Rishi Sunak, really, because Liz Truss wasn't in post long enough for anyone to know what she was up to, apart from deliberately tanking the British economy. So the Rwandan debacle, front page of the Times, right-wing rebellion threatens Rwanda bill. Front page of the Daily Mail, down to the wire. After day of grandstanding from both wings of the Tory party, Rishi faces Rwanda vote today that could sink his leadership. I remember yesterday, the front page of that newspaper was dedicated to giving Gary Lineker a kicking for criticising the Rwanda bill that today they're reporting everybody in the Tory party's got a problem with. Ben Wallace on the front of the Telegraph, do not let Rwanda row, bring down government. They're frit. They're frit. They're worried that it will. And so it goes on. I mean, God forbid. Thank the Lord for the Daily Star, which continues to plough a particularly hilarious furrow through Fleet Street at the minute and never gets the credit that it deserves. Front page of The Sun, admittedly not the major story. That's something about Tyson Fury and the council tax in Cheshire. But the little story on the side, MPs, we can sink boat bill. I don't think they will, for the record. And the Daily Express, Rishi's Rwanda bill stands on side of British people. That's a quote from the chairman of the party, Richard Holden, who's written for the Daily Express. And, you know, that Robbie Burns line that I share with you quite often about having the gift to see how others see us. Oh, wad some gift the gifty gears to see ourselves as others see us. I've stopped doing the accent because everyone thought I was auditioning for Auf Wiedersehen Pit. And that just does stop me in my tracks. Things aren't going well in other countries. Goodness knows Macron's got a massive problem with an immigration bill. You've got a far-right leader being elected in the Netherlands. So, you know, there is no prize for coming last that we're applying for at the moment. But just in terms of the focus of our government and our governing party on this tiny, tiny thing and the prominence and the power and the influence that it gives to very weird people, you know, people who are not household names, possibly even in their own households, but people who are profoundly weird. People like Danny Kruger and Miriam Cates, who come out with stuff on sort of marriage and nuclear families that wouldn't have been out of place in the 19th century. It's Marc Francois, I mean, a truly ridiculous man, all of whom have been proved horribly and violently wrong about the last thing they used to bring down a Tory Prime Minister, and yet none of whom appear to possess even the slimmest scintilla of self-awareness that would cause them to say, this reminds me a bit of Brexit. And we got that completely wrong. Maybe we should wind our necks in, fellow Five Families members, and just see. But no, they are, of course, inflated on their own self-importance and treated like tribunes of the people by right-wing media. It is, of course, the people who end up paying the price. But the question I've got for you this morning, in case you were wondering, is one I've wanted to ask you for a while, and I have held off on grounds of fear that you wouldn't answer, fear that you wouldn't be interested, fear that we wouldn't get a multiplicity of opinion. But I want you to think for about 45 seconds, and then I want you to dial 0345 6060 973, and then I want you to answer this question. Does the country care about the Rwanda bill on anything like the scale that the Conservative Party does? That's all. And obviously, when you are speaking for yourself, you are speaking for the country. So you might, for example, find it disgusting yourself, but at work, genuinely there are votes there for the taking. If we send refugees to Rwanda, where refugees very recently got shot dead for protesting about food rationing, if we send refugees to Rwanda, then Bob over there in accounts and your Auntie Doris on Facebook, all of that, there are votes to be won. That's the question that I want. That's the question that I want answered by you today. Am I right in thinking that this is nothing like the issue for the British people that it is for the Tory party? 0345 6060 973. There it is. Is the Rwanda policy anything like as important to the British people as it is to this very, very weird iteration of the British Conservative Party? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And I may today do things a little bit differently and rattle through calls rather than pick carefully over the carcass of your thoughts. But I may not. Who knows? Only one way to find out. 0345 6060 973. It's 10:18.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 21 minutes after 10. Jim in Reading says, you've asked a rhetorical question, James. No one gives a flying flan. I quite like that phrase. I'm not so sure, actually. You have to have some sense of the Tory parties using focus groups or polling or having arrived at the conclusion that this Rwanda policy is of epic importance to a significant part of the population. Otherwise, why they expended so much political energy on it? But I don't know. I mean, that's presuming that they're operating in a vaguely rational or normal sense, which is probably a little bit optimistic given the events of recent years. I'll read it again, Michael in Glasgow, and I won't do the accent, but I don't think I got it wrong. Everyone's saying I got it wrong again. Oh, wad some power, the gifty gears, to see ourselves as others see us. It wad free money, a blunder, free us, and foolish notion. It would fray money. It wad fray. I think it's hard to do it without trying to do an accent. But anyway, the sentiment behind Robbie Burns' words is that if we could see ourselves as others see us, it would stop us doing stupid things. Like, I don't know, calling ourselves the five families when you are five groups of Tories competing to be more racist than each other. Laura's in Sevenoaks. Laura, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
Thanks
Laura.
for taking the call.
You're very welcome.
I've never spoken to you before.
Well, I've spoken to you, although not directly.
Just by text.
Yes, exactly. What would you like to say?
We won't go there. I want to say that up until a few weeks ago, I would have agreed with the other people texting in and what you were saying, that this was not a vote winner and something either no one cared about or that people thought was a bad idea. Until I was in the office on the day that the Supreme Court announced their ruling, and I got that dreaded BBC News update noise on my phone.
Yeah.
And a colleague said, "Oh God, what's happened now?" And I said, "Oh no, for once it's good news," and announced what the news was. To which a 30-year-old colleague, so I say that a young woman, turned to me and said, "Well, is that good news?" Well, yes. And she said, "Well, what's wrong with Rwanda? We've got to send them somewhere." To which I was flabbergasted and
really? But I mean, you know that people like that exist. You
just don't think that they sit across the desk from you. That I was so unaware.
Do my job for a while. Okay, so
and no one argued with her. That was the bit that was even more worrying. So then I kind of felt that I couldn't argue because I thought maybe I'm the only one in the room that doesn't.
Or maybe she was, and people just didn't want to have an argument. So her vote could be affected, do you think, or she just sort of didn't have a very deep understanding of the issues?
I mean, either way. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. The what's wrong with Rwanda, and then we've got to send them somewhere.
No, but it is a constituency of people, and it's big enough to make their hero come third on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, I suppose, although a lot of them don't think it goes far enough. That I think is probably the Tories' problem, that even if people quite like the idea of deporting refugees in general, it's not going to happen on a big enough scale or quickly enough to deliver the sort of democratic fillip that they're hoping for. So why do they continue to do it? I have to say that obviously, I'm only half joking when I mention to Laura what I do for a living. Obviously, I encounter people who are in favour of deporting anybody who sounds a bit foreign, but and I encounter them at work. But the broader conversation, whether I'm using Idiot's Corner or whether I'm using my switchboard or whether I'm just looking at the emails that come into the programme, or whether I'm on social media, apart from the very noisy constituency of people with lots of numbers after their names and lots of flags in their profiles and bulldog avatars and massive problems with Sadiq Khan for reasons they're not entirely clear about. Apart from that constituency of voter, which is, not negligible, I don't see it as being salient. And even for that constituency of voter, the failure of it to succeed could be a bigger problem for the Tories than the promise that it will. David's in Chesterfield. David, what would you like to say?
First of all, I find it all frustrating. It sends me crazy. My feeling is that they're trying to actually stir up something, a bit like Cameron did in 2010 with the welfare claimants, to really keep the red wall voters. That's what they're focusing on.
Yeah, but you can always find someone who knows someone who's on welfare and, you know, living in a massive mansion. It's a much easier thing to scaremonger with.
This one, I just think it's actually playing to the worst bigotry in people.
But is it working?
It will with a percent. My brain only works in percentages. It will with a small percent.
But they're already bigoted. They're not. Yeah. I mean, who are they going to vote for? The Liberal Democrats. They hate foreigners. You know, they love the idea of deporting refugees to countries where refugees get shot. They're already on side. They might be migrating further to the right, to whatever Farage's latest outfit is called, but they can't. They're not going to be coming into the party from the left, are they? As a consequence. So who's it for?
I'm not. This is what I mean. I've studied my degrees in politics. I'm retired now, and I look back. And as I said to the researcher, I mean, I remember decent politicians, Harold Wilson, even Ted Heath, I never supported him. And I look around now, and it sends me crazy, absolutely crazy. And I don't think will it work? No.
I don't know. I mean, then why are they expending so much energy on it? Have they become so detached from the general public that they think this is a hugely important issue? Or am I so detached from the general public that I think it probably isn't? And David in Chesterfield thinks it probably isn't a hugely important issue, Laura's colleague notwithstanding. Also, in the office, someone says something and you say something in response. It doesn't necessarily mean you've been up all night thinking about it, or that when you make a list of key concerns facing the country at the moment or influencing your political position, it doesn't necessarily mean that it would be at the top of the list. So have a think. I don't know what you point at as proof that it does really matter. I did see one thing with regards to the Jungle Show. There are inevitably claims that somehow it was rigged because Farage didn't win. And one of the interesting things, I see this quite a lot. People say things like, everyone I know voted for him. And you think, yeah, that isn't quite the item of evidence, the article of evidence that you think it is. So I wonder if the Tories are suffering from that. I wonder if the Tories are suffering. It was a woman called Maureen, actually. I think her tweet got picked up by the rather splendid The Poke account. And they're all convinced that ITV paid Nigel Farage £1.5 million and then deliberately ensured that he didn't thrive, flourish, do well or win on a programme that they were paying him £1.5 million to appear on. So logic clearly isn't their strong suit, or his, of course, except he knows what he's doing. And a woman called Maureen said, it must be a fix, because everyone I know voted for him. Is it possible that the Tories in Parliament think that this is hugely important because everyone they know thinks it's hugely important? The problem is they only know people like Suella Braverman, Priti Patel, Mark Francois. They only know now the membership that turns up at party events and each other. 13 years in power has cut them off completely from the country. Or is it the rest of us that are barking up the wrong tree? And in fact, where you live, where you work, Christmas dinner, people will be talking of nothing else. And I'll tell you what I would compare it to. I'd compare it to Brexit, but not in the ways that some odd right-wing commentators are doing. Simply in the way that it dominated conversation. The way that Brexit was on everybody's lips. There were family frictions. There were family fractures. There were family fissures. I just threw a few Fs in there for no particular reason. There were family breakdowns and conversations and colleagues and everybody and in-laws. And the nature of the Brexit conversation was probably the most universal that we'll ever have in British politics in our lifetime. Rwanda is nowhere near that. But if you said Brexit was a 10, or to go a bit Spinal Tap for a moment, it's an 11. Brexit's an 11 on the amplifier. I think Rwanda's at best a 2 or a 3. Don't you? 0345 6060 973. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:34 is the time. Listen, I know that people who think that it's objectionable or obnoxious or worse, care about the Rwanda policy. But I think we can confidently declare that they are not the people to whom Rishi Sunak is appealing. So the question of to whom is he appealing with this increasingly desperate attempt to get some legislation through the Commons? I think the clever money at the moment suggests that he probably will. But of course, as with those mad days of Theresa May trying to get Brexit legislation through the Commons, you never know for sure until they've been through the division lobby. But mentioning Brexit, if that were an 11 on the amplifier of public conversation or private conversation, in terms of how much we conversed about it, if Brexit was an 11, what is Rwanda? I think it's at best a 2 or a 3, which makes it mysterious that he is investing so much political capital and energy in it. 10:35 is the time. Do you think the country cares anything like as much about this policy as the Conservative Party does? Alan's in Faversham. Alan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. You've asked 2 questions. One is, do people care? To which I think the answer is not yet. And the other is this a vote winner? To which I think the answer is potentially. And the reason I think this is because if you go back to Brexit, prior to 2014, we go down the pub, nobody was talking about the EU. Half the people couldn't even tell you whether we were members of the EU or not.
Yeah.
But by 2016, it was the biggest conversation in town. And I think that's what they're trying to. They're going to push this until people care about it. Yeah. And I think we're probably at about 2015 at the moment in terms of.
That's interesting, and it's quite a compelling analysis as well, Alan. Thank you. I don't know, for the same reason really that the lad talking a minute ago about welfare scaremongering. I don't know whether it does work in the way that you describe it though, because the numbers are going to be negligible, even if the planes get off the ground. We did think for a while that they wanted lots of legal battles and they wanted lots of problems and they wanted to be able to demonise judges. Back in the dim and distant past, when Priti Patel was Home Secretary, one theory was, and I think I certainly had a proper look at it as a theory. One theory was that they relished the demonisation of lawyers, the attacks on the judges, and they didn't actually want the policy to succeed. They wanted to be able to inflame the base by giving them new enemies to hate. In this case, British laws and British judges.
Yeah, I agree with absolutely everything you said there, and the policy itself is barking.
But that can't be true anymore. I think it might have been true then, but he needs it to work now. Otherwise, his own party's going to tear him to shreds.
Oh no, he needs to get it. He needs to get it through. He needs to get it passed, and then they can claim that look, it's like we got Brexit done. We got Rwanda done. It doesn't actually have to achieve anything once it's done. Yeah. He just has to say, look, I got it done.
Susan's in Deal. She agrees with you. It must be a Kent thing. You're right to compare it to Brexit. Brexit wasn't an 11 before the referendum. The EU was never anywhere near the top of people's concerns in polling. I think the Conservatives are hoping to do a Brexit and whip people up about the small boats until they manage to turn it into an 11 and it becomes a major vote winner. If people were whippable-uppable, surely they would have been whipped up by now.
Oh, I don't know. Sometimes it's not working as well as it worked with Brexit. That's for sure. It's taking
it's not. But maybe it's the only
much longer.
It's the only tune they know. It's the only tune they know, Alan.
Well, they've got nothing else, have they?
The 5 families, as they call themselves, Mark Gambino, Francois. The 5 families are just that's all they know is how to do internecine warfare. Mark Garnier, who I think is the MP for Wyre Forest, I think he's my mum's MP, told Ben Kentish last night, Steve in Manchester tells me, that he'd had more emails about puppy farming than Rwanda policy. Good for Ben for getting on a Tory who doesn't sound mad. I imagine that was quite a challenge for the production team. 10:39 is the time. Thank you, Alan. Hello, Ian in Croydon. What do you think, Ian?
I think it's a complete waste of time, James, and I think the British public, by and large, don't care about this. The only people that do care are the type of people that voted Brexit and...
Well, that's a lot of people.
Because of, the ones that voted Brexit because there was not too many brown people in the supermarket.
Yeah.
The reality is... the reason the Tories, and particularly Sunak's pushing this, is because it takes a lot of other things off the agenda, off the front pages.
Yes.
The areas where they're failing, people are focusing on Rwanda. They're trying to say, we're trying to do something. People are objecting to it. Labour Party are happy to have as many immigrants as you want in this country. The reality of the situation is that there are 40,000 people coming across in boats. This is going to take 200 or 300.
Yes.
That's less than 1%.
You don't need to be Carol Vorderman, who I'm delighted to say will be on the LBC schedule over the holiday period. You don't need to be Carol Vorderman to see the problem with those sums, do you, Ian?
Well, if someone's willing to spend a lot of money and risk travelling across the channel and dying, a 1% chance of going to Rwanda will have no deterrent effect whatsoever.
And wasn't there a Foreign Office civil servant giving evidence yesterday? I think Clever Connor upstairs told me this before I came on air this morning, who was saying exactly that, a sort of Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office Mandarin, Panjandrum, saying exactly what you've just said. How can it... So it's a fundamental misunderstanding of desperation, isn't it?
It's all about taking other items off the front of the news.
Well, I don't know that I'd agree with you. I'm disagreeing with everybody today, but you should be used to it by now, because Sunak's job's on the line. This could be a Theresa May moment. If enough of the headbangers bang their heads, then he could be a de facto vote of no confidence this evening, and he'll be getting his sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap by the weekend.
Well, they'll call an early general election if that's the case.
Yeah, but I don't think Sunak is doing this to distract from all the other problems that he's got. I think he wishes this would go away, and this is being propelled and driven by people like Suella Braverman and Honest Bob Jenrick resigning and stuff like that. But I mean, the problem is, as I think the last two calls have demonstrated, Ian, you and Alan, this question I could have asked at any point in the last 2 years, and the answers might have been very different at each point in the last 2 years. Why are they doing this? Does the public care? Two questions. Certainly the first one, why are they doing this? I genuinely thought when Priti Patel was driving this charabanc of bigotry, I genuinely thought they wanted rows and they wanted court cases and they wanted failures so that they could paint the British judiciary as Brussels, to use the Brexit analogies that other callers have reached for. They want it to be a wedge issue like Brexit, but you don't have an enemy in place yet. The enemy is not the refugees. That doesn't quite work. That only works with the racists. The enemy will be the judicial system that protects them. And you've seen that evolve into an attack upon law itself, onto an attack upon international treaties, conventions on everything from human rights to refugees. I think 2 years ago I would have answered that question differently to how I answer it now. Now, why are they doing it? Because they have to. Because the 5 families have got Rishi Sunak's testicles in a vice. Not to put too fine a point on it. Sean's in Brixton. Sean, what do you think?
Yo, James, I think, most of your previous callers are onto something. And this is a question that I had to call in on because I've been thinking this for a while.
Yeah.
To answer it, I don't think the country cares as much as everyone or the Tory party thinks they do. I think the Tory party cares because the blueprint for Brexit is already there. Everybody knows right now that the sentiment for Brexit has fallen off, right? But what was the main driving force of that was controlling our borders, right? And now, if you're politicizing Rwanda, they feel that the precipice of what they had, the foundation of what they had with Brexit that got them that 80-seat majority will repeat itself in the end.
If they can find the right wedge, they can repeat history.
Absolutely. And you know what? It annoys me because I'm a migrant, right? Yeah. But I've lived here for over a third of my life. But It annoys me because I subscribe to the Times, and that's digitally. So I go on, these particular points of interest into the comments section. And what I've noticed is a shift between, when even Braverman was in, there's a couple of people that are saying Suella, you're a treasure, keep going, we back you. Now more people they don't even care. Yeah. And the volume of numbers have dropped off. So it's
So the red meat's not working.
Nah.
This is interesting.
Wrong.
So you're in Brixton in South London. Stephen's in Sheffield, and he writes, I work in a factory in Sheffield, and it's just not being picked up, James. Either people don't care or believe that it's ever going to happen and are furious that we've handed over 300 million quid. Sunak is nowhere near the salesman that Johnson is, and that's why it's not taking off like Brexit did.
I completely agree. Like, it's rinse, wash, and repeat for these Tories. They're delusional, and they just think that these, what do we like to call them, culture wars, are really going to be the magic wand that's going to save them.
Well, they said that, didn't they? 30p.
I don't think that is.
Well, something else could be. I mean, 30p Leenock actually said out loud, shortly before being made deputy chairman of the party, that they've got nothing to actually campaign on in terms of achievements and successes. They won the last election. I grant you, he's not exactly Walter Bagehot when it comes to political analysis, but he is representative of a particularly gristly rump of British politics, and so they would go into the next election on culture wars and transgender issues. And I suppose they see this as a very important front on the culture wars. The problem with culture wars is that they force populists to do politics. That's the calculation I think they've all missed. Culture wars force populists to do politics. The reason why Farage can retain popularity is because he never has to do actual politics. He can just say jam tomorrow, or apple pie for everybody, or it's easy to fix this problem. Whereas if you adopt those tactics in Parliament, as many populists have done, people like Jonathan Gullis and 30p Lee Anderson and various other odd characters who've come into British politics in recent years, they think that you can do the populism and somehow essay it into politics or policy. You can't. You can do politics or you can do populism. You do populism right, then you don't need to do any politics because you've got a cowed and completely brainwashed population. Look, Donald Trump does populism very, very well. Doesn't do any politics really, just does populism. Rishi Sunak's bad at politics and populism. So he came into power and some of us thought, well, that's good because that will be an end to populism and he'll probably be quite good at politics. As it turns out, he's rubbish at populism but has nevertheless tried to do it, and he's rubbish at politics and has no choice but to continue to try to do it. And that's the end of my TED Talk.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10 minutes to 11. Keir Starmer giving an important speech, the key theme of which I think is that the Labour Party has changed since the last general election. And I see the phrase that Labour will, quote, get our country back, is also appearing in some of the headlines. We'll be talking to Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, in just under an hour on this programme. If there's anything in particular you'd like me to ask him, do drop me a little note to 84850 or at Mr. James O.B. I've done it again. I said some vaguely warm words about a Tory, in this case Mark Garnier, the MP for Wyre Forest, who did indeed tell Ben Kentish, Ben with you from 10 p.m. every night, well, Monday to Thursday nights on LBC, doing a cracking job actually. And he had Mark Garnier on the programme last night, and Mark Garnier, MP for Wyre Forest and former Tory minister, said that he does get more emails from constituents about puppy farms than he does about the Rwanda scheme, saying, I'm not sure how we've got ourselves into the position where we're having endless arguments about this stuff. We're burning up a lot of energy and goodwill with the public. Some people feel very strongly about illegal migration, but not as many as about puppy farming. We've got to be talking about the things that are important to people, and this isn't necessarily one of them. So a former Tory minister there endorsing my decision to go down this road this morning, and suggesting that they're right, that it might be hugely important to the Parliamentary Conservative Party and possibly the Conservative Party membership, but it doesn't seem that important to anybody else. And the reason I mention my jinx, whenever I say a vaguely warm word about a Conservative politician, they either very quickly do something to deserve my condemnation, or you remind me of something that they've done that rather undermines the warm word that I've just uttered. And Mark Garnier, of course, was the politician who sent his secretary out to buy sex toys and also referred to her, I can't say that word on the radio, he sugar boobs, except he didn't say boobs. He used another word beginning with T to describe his own secretary. He's still the MP for Wyre Forest and chair of the Committee on Arms Export Control. So that character actually looks in the current Conservative Party, that character looks like a sensible person. 10:53 is the time. And Mark Francois thinks he's Al Pacino. Jorit's in Amsterdam. Jorit, what would you like to say?
Morning, sugar boobs. How are you?
Stop it. You can't do that. You'll get me into trouble. Carry on.
It's hard to stay on track with you making jokes like that.
Yeah, I apologize.
Anytime I get depressed about the absolute parody my country's making of itself, I tune into you and I realize it's not all that bad.
Well, I'd take what we've got over what you've got at the moment. Certainly, if he manages to form an actual government, but that's a conversation for another day. Back to the Rwanda issue.
I hear you on that, and I hope he doesn't. But if he does, we have coalition politics, and that provides some
checks and balances.
Mediating effect.
Yes, sure.
Now, I'm rather nauseated by, speaking of populism, the quote you gave of Keir Starmer's just now, get our country back.
Yeah.
The undertone in that is just galling. And I hope when you speak to him in an hour, you ask him if in his heart of hearts he doesn't agree that any Western leader that tells voters that it is feasible to get immigration numbers down at all is lying. And it's also nonsensical. I mean, if you want to do that, we have to start radically reforming the International Monetary Fund, looking at the basis of the cognitive dissonance that underlies the north-south imbalance in our economy, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing is, in your country and mine, what did you say, 40,000 people a year walk up on your shores?
Yeah.
How many pubs have closed for lack of staff in your country and mine? It is absolutely true what you say, that the Rwanda deal in and of itself is not important to people. But performative immigration politics is. And convincing people that you are willing to defy international law, the judiciary, logic, human rights, common sense, etc., to get as many brown people off your shores as possible works.
Well, it doesn't. Well, I mean, we know it can do, but they've got the wrong vehicle for it here, because the Rwandan thing, whether it's a factory in Sheffield or a Tory former minister on Ben Kentich's show last night, that it is not an appeal to broad slices of the population, and that may not be a problem. It may be a very deliberate appeal to a very narrow slice of the population, but the amount of energy and political capital that they're expending on it doesn't make sense at the moment. It doesn't make sense.
No, I agree. I think there's two things that you've said that taken together here explain that. One is that they've painted themselves into this corner by playing the Priti Patel game of going, look, the activist judges, look, activist Europe, etc.
Yeah.
The fact is, the best protection against increases in immigration was the European Union, because it gathered all these immigrants that are now at your shores in Greece, which is now a far right-wing country, in Spain, which is now a far right-wing country, in Italy, which is now a far right-wing country. So having lost that protection, they then came up with another scheme that could offer them an enemy to play against, just like you explained. And I think Rishi Sunak is stuck with an inheritance where
the populist
if he backs
inheritance.
down, he signals, but not only to the 5 families. If he backs down, he signals to the factory in Sheffield. That's my dog voices.
I kind of worked that out, Jory. I'm quite clever that way.
But
that he's failed.
The factory in Sheffield. I'm sorry.
No, you're going to have to deal with your canine. I'll finish for you, and it would open up an attack on his leadership, because say what you like about these people, Boris Johnson might have been the mothership of narcissism and self-gratification. They all prioritise personal ambition over the country or over political change or over progress or policy or whatever it may be. You can see it so clearly now with Kemi Badenoch, who is doing the Liz Truss thing of talking absolute twaddle about both trade deals and Brexit, because she knows that that's how you get to the top of the popularity charts exclusively among Conservative Party members. So it is there. The reason why Rishi Sunak is pursuing this Rwanda bill at 10:57 with time for at least one more call is simply because keeping his job depends on it. It's got nothing to do with the country. It's got nothing to do with refugees. It's actually got nothing to do with small boats. But the political narrative is such that his job, his leadership of the Conservative Party, as of now, depends upon being seen to be doing everything within his power to get this legislation through Parliament. Even if the legislation is bogus, even if all of his advisors are telling him, even if you win tonight, it won't work. Doesn't matter. That's how mad the Conservative Party and by association the country has now become. A policy about which nobody cares, propelling a tiny number of incredibly self-important politicians currently referring to themselves as the five families to hold a Prime Minister hostage, an unelected Prime Minister hostage, unless he delivers the impossible. There it is. Write that down. Stick it on a T-shirt. Richard's in York. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello,
to use a couple of, well, first of all, I've got two dogs that are very much socialist, and they probably want to go and join in with the last guy's dogs as well.
Well, try and use powers of persuasion to keep them quiet. There's enough barking on this programme already.
I've closed the door, and I'm very late. So what I'd like to say is I feel like the public generally don't particularly care about the Rwanda thing.
Yes.
And my point was that if, as a voter, you don't particularly... Sorry, I'm very nervous.
Take your time.
You're that age, first-time caller.
You've got all the time in the world, Richard. It's a pleasure to have you on the programme. It really is.
Well, I'm very thankful for that. And just to give it a quick bit of background, why the nerves, and I'm at home at this time of day, I have mental health problems and a myriad of... physical medical problems, which kind of relates to my call.
Yes.
If you're like myself and my wife, and we have to worry about gas bills, electric bills, cost of food, then that is the thing that sort of focuses on where our votes go.
I wonder whether that's always true, but there's a tipping point where it does act. So, because even if you're worrying about your fuel bills and your cost of living and your gas bills in the state, even if you are worrying about that, I can still use traditional demonisation of the other, whether it's a refugee or a welfare claimant. But there comes a point where it doesn't actually wash anymore because I'm so worried about the other stuff that I haven't got the bandwidth to be brainwashed into caring more about immigration.
Absolutely, and I've said this to people before, prior to all the cost of living and all the rest, and where people have said, damned immigrants and all the rest of it, and I'm thinking, how desperate would you have to be to come all the way, say, I don't know, from Afghanistan, let's say, or Eritrea,
and risk your life in a dinghy?
Horrible. Sorry.
No, I've got to crack on. You've taken me right up to the news, and I'm a little bit late. But you make a brilliant point, because the problem is if you get the narrative out there that they're all swinging the lead and that they're not at all desperate and they're not even real refugees, you end up in such a stupid position, because now you're having to argue that they're risking their lives in order to live the life of Riley on a UK benefits system. So none of it ever makes sense, and maybe that's why it's not working like they expected it to work. As we head towards the news, I can tell you that ITV is reporting that an asylum seeker has died on the Bibi Stockholm barge, which was the last front in the so-called culture wars against refugee asylum applications and immigration. This is report on ITV News, and according to their reporter, someone living on the boat has told them that an asylum seeker has died on the Bibi Stockholm barge. This, of course, just hours before MPs vote on the second front in the refugee culture war, the so-called Rwanda plan.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 5 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to talk about Ofsted next. I'm going to talk about two things, really. Obviously, one of them is the terrible tragedy of the head teacher Ruth Perry, whose inquest into the death of has this week seen the senior coroner for Berkshire concluding that Ofsted's inspection of Ruth's school was a contributory factor to her death by suicide. It's important to watch one's language when discussing things such as this. I think that the official guidance from the Samaritans and others is that you never talk about suicide as being the consequence of one single thing. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of losing someone to suicide, but it is... I found out last week that a former colleague of mine had gone down that path, and it is... it is an almost unbelievable moment. And I think one important thing to remember is that it's a congregation of circumstances in a very specific moment that pushes people to the point, and an hour before and an hour after they may not have been at that point. So to talk of a single thing as being the cause, I think is very dangerous and wrong and irresponsible. But it is not done callously or ignorantly. I think, as I understand it, that's the expert guidance on the issue. But the coroner did conclude that it had contributed to her death by suicide. And I mean, 2 unions now have written a joint letter to the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, and to the outgoing Chief Inspector of Schools in England, Amanda Spielman. Do you know, I'm going to resist the urge to say something mildly warm about Gillian Keegan for reasons that I explained in the last hour when I said something mildly warm about Mark Garnier. But they are formally requesting an immediate pause to inspections of schools and colleges so that the issues raised by this coroner can be given proper consideration. So 2 unions representing school leaders in England have called for a halt to Ofsted inspections to allow time for concerns raised by the inquest into the death of head teacher Ruth Perry to be properly addressed. There are 7 areas of concern, including how safeguarding is inspected in schools, its impact on overall effectiveness, a lack of Ofsted training or published policy in key areas, a lack of additional support for schools and colleges that have been graded inadequate. It's a damning indictment of the whole Ofsted inspection system, and the new incoming inspector of schools, Sir Martin Oliver, I think, it is, Gillian Keegan says, going to be working very closely with her 3 weeks today when he starts work to see what more we can do. But we must remember that Ofsted play an important role to keep children safe and to keep standards high. So as I understand it, the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, is currently rejecting calls from 2 major unions for Ofsted inspections to be halted in order to create the time in which concerns raised by this inquest can be properly examined. She says it is important that school inspections continue in the interests of children and parents. Now, I'm minded to ask you why Ofsted inspections are so awful. We got close to it last time we had that conversation, and part of the answer was really obvious once it was explained. Part of the answer is that when Ofsted inspections were first invented, or whatever word you prefer, the inspectors would go in mob-handed. They would pile into a school in numbers and undertake effectively an audit of the teaching in that school and, for want of a better word, the service in that school. Everything from safeguarding through to, I don't know whether they covered school dinners, but the team of inspectors would go in. I think it's Chris in Tower Hamlets rings me often on educational issues, and he's a former head teacher of a big comprehensive school in Tower Hamlets. So, as with almost all of my callers, just not the ones that go viral, he knows what he's talking about. And the very simple message that the inspections as they're being undertaken now do not bear much resemblance to the inspections as they were envisaged when the process was instituted. So that's part of it. But on a personal level, rather than on an institutional or a systemic level, why do you, particularly as a head teacher or a deputy head teacher, but also as a normal teacher, not in a management position, why have Ofsted inspections become such nightmares? 0345 6060 973. It's 10 minutes after 11. That question is up and running. You can book your place to answer that question now before you even know what the next question I'm going to ask is. Why are they so unbearable? So we get radar. Every 3 months we get a number. How many people are listening to the programme? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Quite a lot rides on it. I mean, I had one experience almost 20 years ago when a manager said to me, if things don't improve soon, it may mean, I always remember this, he said, it may mean a parting of the ways. My numbers were just stubborn and stuck at around about the 250,000 mark or something like that. And the message was pretty clear. If things didn't improve, then they'd be looking for somebody else to present mid-morning matters on North Norfolk Digital. Thankfully, today they're closer to 1.5 million than they are to 250,000. But the tension remains. And that's it for us. That's it. That's once every 3 months, a number is published by the audience research organisation Radar, and we either pat ourselves on the back for playing a blinder or furrow our brow briefly and wonder whether or not the programme needs a bit of a tweak or whether Keith needs to get his finger out or something like that. Those are various response. And that's it. So I can't imagine what it would be like to have an inspection or an audit on the scale that Ofsted is like, especially when you're confident in your own mind and in your own heart. You're doing the absolute best that you can. And that of course, is what was so poignant about Ruth Perry's tragic death. The sense that here was someone who was doing their absolute best and someone completely committed to their job and to the children in their care. And in bowl Ofsted, enroll Ofsted, and turn her life upside down, downgrade her school and leave her with the interminable nightmare of knowing that you can't get it upgraded, you can't get it back up again for years sometimes. It sounds hideous to me, but I don't want to base my opinion solely on this one experience. I want you to tell me what it is like. How bad is it when the Ofsted inspectors arrive, okay? And why is it so bad? 0345 606 0973. Now, the second question I want to ask is a little bit more nuanced, I think. It's a little bit subtler, if you like. And I want you to tell me, as a teacher or a head teacher, who you agree with on this. Very simple question. Who do you agree with? Do you agree with the teaching unions that Ofsted inspections should be paused temporarily? A halt. Stop them now. No more Ofsted inspections for the foreseeable future. Or do you agree with the Secretary of State for Education that they have to continue, but we're determined to work sensitively with head teachers and their staff? So I may be able to work out your answer to the second question from your answer to the first, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. Why are Ofsted inspections so traumatic? 0345 606 0973. And is there a case in your mind for halting them for the foreseeable future? Obviously, this is quite a tight phone-in. So if you are minded to ring in, please do. It's not one of those nets that I can chuck out into the ether and catch countless fish, which all start wriggling their way onto the programme. You've got to have personal, specific experience of Ofsted inspections to answer either of these questions. But everybody else is fascinated to hear your answers, whether you've got children in school or not, because whether you realise it or not, the state of the education system in any society is the single most important, with the possible exception of healthcare, the single most important signifier of the direction of traffic the country is going to take in years to come. So why are they so traumatic? 0345 606 0973. And should we call a halt on them for the foreseeable future? It's 11:15.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the call from two teaching unions for Ofsted inspections to be halted follows concerns raised by the inquest into the death of the head teacher, Ruth Perry. I get so many messages now. It's so hard to find them when one's stuck in my mind. But Christine's been in touch and she talks about a perfect storm. And it's not a new thing, but public humiliation in the context of Ofsted inspections and in the context of the tragedy of Ruth Perry. She says, unlike with lots of professions, everyone in your community knows things can happen really, really quickly. So a downgraded Ofsted rating is it can spread like wildfire in the teaching community and bring with it feelings of shame and embarrassment. 11:18 is the time. Mark's in Huddersfield to kick things off. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Nice to speak to you again.
Likewise, Mark.
I work in education. I've done for 20 years, primary school education. I was a head teacher. I worked my way up through from a classroom teacher, and I'm now working. I advise and support head teachers in general, but specifically around Ofsted.
Yeah.
And the situation that I wanted to refer to specifically is just very much to do with the quality and the variation in inspectors who are carrying out these very, very high-stakes inspections.
Yes.
As you were just referring to then, the person who messaged in, Ofsted inspections are potentially career-ending and career-defining.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a very recent example that's happened in the last couple of weeks with a school that I've worked with a lot.
Please.
A very high-quality school working in one of the most challenging and deprived areas of a big city in Leeds. And they experienced an Ofsted team that was led by an inspector who has never been in a senior leadership position in a school. This person's CV reads very clearly.
Does that right? We can take some time on this, so there's no hurry. Yeah. What does that matter? Do I need to be a brilliant footballer to be a brilliant referee? To use a simplistic analogy.
No, you don't. But I think that don't footballify it, James.
Touché.
The fact is that the job of head teachers now is so enormously complex.
So you need to have some personal knowledge of it.
Exactly.
Okay.
You need to have empathy, and if you are a person coming in to inspect a school who hasn't sat in that office and understands the hundreds of decisions you make a day, the enormous amount of vitriol that will get poured at you from all angles, and I say vitriol because it is, Amanda Spielman, I disagree enormously with virtually everything she's said and done in her tenure at Ofsted, but what she did say in the last couple of weeks was that the social contract between schools and parents has broken down. Yeah. So head teachers deal with vast amounts of incoming vitriol, the occasional bit of praise, but more often than not, it's like anything in life. People get behind the keyboard when they want to complain far more quickly than they do to praise. So when you've got somebody who doesn't understand...
takes a mental toll. Was it always the case that back in the day, would all inspectors have had experience of head teaching?
Virtually, if not head teaching, it would be senior leadership or very well experienced teachers. But like you say, teams used to be extensive. You used to have subject experts. But as with anything, really, the quality of an organisation will be reflected in its staff because you don't get good people wanting to work at poor organisations, as a rule.
Of course, it becomes self-fulfilling, a bit like the cabinet.
Does, yeah.
It's like the cabinet.
You know what? Nailed it. That's it. That's the thing. It's we started a race to the bottom a long time ago, and we're plumbing the depths now because the quality of people inspecting schools simply isn't good enough and consistent enough. Hey, there are still some great people out there.
Yes, I'm sure there is, and their ears must be burning at the moment. So I'm grateful to you for acknowledging that.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah, there is some great, but it's not that when you have a system as high stakes as Ofsted, everyone has to be of high quality.
But then you might have, now forgive me for this irresponsible question, but then competence doesn't necessarily create catastrophe, because I could come in as someone who wasn't very confident, whether I realised it or not. The temptation would be to do less, not more, to wave it through, to leave it where it was before. So Jim's been in touch. He says, I've had 4 inspections as a classroom teacher. Increasingly, they seem to come in looking for problems rather than looking for things that are going well. I found the inspectors rude. They assess you and your lesson in 20 minutes, give a comment, usually critical, and leave the room. Yeah. There's no opportunity to discuss their findings.
But if you take that in the context that I was saying then about the quality of people, and then link it to what you said about the current cabinet, it attracts a certain type of person, and that certain type of person is a narcissistic sociopath.
Well, that's a bit strong. Not in the case of the cabinet, but possibly in the case of Ofsted. It just brings in a Jobsworth mentality, or someone's on a power trip. Someone who's on a power trip.
Nailed it. Yeah. Perhaps narcissistic sociopath is a little bit strong, but you certainly get people who don't have the self-awareness and the empathy.
Listen, this is only one perspective, but you've joined the dots because the one follows on inevitably from the other, doesn't it? And the next question, to which I can probably guess what your answer would be, but I'm not 100% sure. Should they call them off for the foreseeable future? Call an actual halt to Ofsted inspections?
They absolutely should, because once you've completely lost the faith of the profession that you are inspecting, inspection should never be easy, and I am in favour of inspection.
Right.
Because schools have to be held to account.
Yes.
It's vital that schools are held to account, because I've seen firsthand what happens when they
freewheel,
and they can decline very quickly. They can start to take their foot off the pedal, for want of a better phrase.
Yes, I understand.
But the reality is that unless the profession respects the people who are inspecting it can never be progressive. It can never be constructive, because it's an atmosphere of fear. Because genuinely, head teachers' careers, and in the case of Ruth Perry, lives are on the line.
Very powerfully put, Mark. I thank you. 25 minutes after 11, and it makes sense. You're welcome to challenge any analyses on this programme, any contributions. And I would remind you, Mark was at pains to stress that there will be Ofsted inspectors doing a brilliant job in incredibly difficult circumstances. But the bigger picture, the broader trend, seems to be an ugly one. Anne is in Colchester. Anne, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I'm a teacher that's actually just recently been through an inspection, and it was possibly the most soul-destroying experience that I've ever been put through, and I've been teaching 13 years before that. You mentioned radar. I was a journalist for radio, so I can compare to that, and it's nowhere near comparable to...
I mean, just for anyone just tuning in, I wasn't suggesting that it was. I was doing the absolute opposite. I was pointing out that it's a walk in the park compared to what an Ofsted inspection must be like. But tell me more. Tell me why it was so awful.
So, I mean, we have a very strong team at the school I work at. We are all confident in what we do. We do it because we care. We're passionate, which I think all teachers do. Anyone who works in that sort of profession, you do it because you love it. And to come in, I think, for us, the inspectors that we had on our days that were coming in, they weren't looking for excellence. They were probably looking for what wasn't excellent. Right. So they didn't come in. So it felt like there was an agenda from literally the moment they walked in, which was pretty hard for the people to then...
Why do you think that is, Anne?
So the way they were questioning it, even they had children really upset. We've had parents who didn't actually complain because they obviously speak to the children, and the children went home not happy with how people had spoken to them. And you think, if this is a primary school, they're young children, you'd need to kind of have a bit of empathy with those children, especially. It's fine as a teacher to an extent. We do our job. We want to be held to account because we're passionate. We want to make sure we're doing a good job for those children. Yes. But you also... it's the way you were questioned and grilled on things and weren't really given time to explain or...
It sounds like they're relishing your discomfort, possibly.
Yeah.
Did you feel that?
It was a really uncomfortable experience, and colleagues who had to have sort of 2 hours of being grilled by these inspectors on their subject, it was just... They were just exhausted when they came back, and then they have to go into the class to then teach, to then have someone pop in for 10 minutes to judge everything on that.
Quite extraordinary, really.
So it's really...
What would be, so it would be like my boss listening to 10 minutes of 2 years of output and basing all of his decisions on that?
Yeah, pretty much, just saying, and then not giving you I mean, other inspectors may be different, but the ones we had certainly didn't then give us the opportunity to say, well, actually, X, Y, this is what happened after, or this is what then happened, or, because you can't judge a whole... hour session, for a lesson or however long it is.
So it's really not fit for purpose then, in your view?
Not at the moment. I think it is very hard. We do need to be inspected. That I totally agree with. We need to be held to account, and we need to make sure we are giving the best service for all the children that we are teaching, because it's really important. But I think where you sometimes have inspectors that might not have experience of what your school is like, because every school is very different. So you need to sort of maybe have to tailor fit to those inspectors, not really just have... If you work at a faith school, you're probably going to need someone who's worked at a faith school to understand something different. And if it's not a faith school, not have someone, there's different issues, or inner city and villages. They're all very different. Every school is very different.
But I suppose that puts Ofsted in the position of being choosers. with staff where the reality seems to be that they're closer to beggars.
Yeah. I can imagine. But I mean, it hasn't got the reputation of teachers.
I can't imagine anyone listening to this. I can't imagine anyone in your stage of your career thinking, do you know what I'd like to do next? I'd like to be an Ofsted inspector.
Yeah, no, definitely not. No, that's true. But the problem is that you're sort of putting off teachers as well, aren't you, by what they're doing coming in? And we're struggling for teachers. I mean, people do love it and they love the profession, but the amount of stress and then that put, extra stress from it, it's not worth people's while sometimes.
No, well, hang in there. This is interesting. This is interesting as well from Leslie. She says, as a parent who wanted to praise the school during an Ofsted inspection, I could only find contact details to make a complaint. So they seem to be aimed at finding negatives.
So I mean, for us it did feel that, but my children's school that was inspected last year, theirs was a very different experience. So it's very much, I think, like a roll of a dice who comes in your school. Yeah, well, there it is. And I mean, that is something that is a leadership issue, because you should be having higher standards and higher standards of consistency across a workforce, even if it is hard to recruit and the terms and conditions have been affected by austerity. That is literally what the Commissioner should be concentrating on. But rather the Chief Inspector in this case. It's 11:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Joined by the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, in about 10 minutes' time, just over 10 minutes' time. He has been delivering a speech designed to describe his Labour Party as having changed almost beyond recognition from the one that was trounced at the polls by Boris Johnson's Conservative Party in 2019. Stand by for that. First, more on Ofsted and why it is such a traumatic experience to have the inspectors come in, and whether it's a bit more equivocal, aren't we, on the question of whether or not you can call a halt on inspections. The teachers we've spoken to not necessarily persuaded that would be the way forward, but very, very clear on the need for some fairly serious and profound change to the system. Roy's in Bristol. Roy, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi,
hello,
James. I was a lawyer governor for an academy in Bristol that had a no-notice inspection in November 2019 that was turned into a full inspection over 3 days.
Right.
And we were downgraded to inadequate and put into special measures, which essentially meant the end of the academy. It was an extraordinary experience and a very worrying one.
Yes.
I and our chair, who is an experienced environmental agency person dealing with judicial review, looked carefully at Ofsted's own code of practice as regards how inspections should be conducted. And we found huge numbers of breaches of that code. So what we did is we put in a very lengthy document to Ofsted saying, can you please review, please note all these points that bring to your attention. The reality is that review was looked at by Ofsted, no one independent.
Who inspects their qui custodiet custodes.
Exactly. And they came back and they altered one or two words. Wow. We were not happy. We decided that we would launch judicial review proceedings. So we instructed lawyers. We raised £20,000 from parents and others in order to challenge this. We submitted, in due course, a full claim for judicial review. Our papers, believe it or not, James, went to 1,000 pages in length.
Gosh.
Ofsted put in a defence. It then went before a judge, because to go to a full hearing of judicial review, a judge has to say, there's a good case here. I believe this could succeed.
Yes.
We succeeded, James. We succeeded. The judge said that he was satisfied that there was evidence of bias in the approach taken by Ofsted to our inspection. However, in order to enable us to take the matter further,
I think I know what's
we
coming.
would have to have raised another £60,000.
And the school needs services, minibuses. Yes.
One of the central points I'm trying to make here, James, is there is no way you can properly call Ofsted to account.
How interesting.
You ask for a review Ofsted reviews it.
Yeah.
If you take it to court, they've got all the money in the world. They don't have to worry about money.
Yeah.
We couldn't. And another interesting aspect behind our inspection, James, is that it was in effect initiated by Damien Hines, who was Secretary of State for Education at the time, who wrote to Amanda Spielman saying, we've got concerns about Stein schools, because ours was the Steiner Academy.
Okay.
Also freestanding, but on its own. He wrote to Amanda Spielman saying, we want these schools inspected. So we were the third Steiner Academy to be inspected. Everyone was found inadequate. We discovered that the same inspectors were going to each one. Okay.
Yes.
Unbelievably.
I just need to stress that I have only got your version of events here.
But fortunately, there's quite a lot in the public domain that you can look up.
Yes, so I'm seeing.
But there is no doubt that you can access the correspondence from Damien Hines to Amanda Spielman. And
you had leave to, the judge approved your plan to pursue them for bias.
Which is quite extraordinary. And we had the unique opportunity, James, through disclosure, of seeing the notes of the inspectors that they'd taken during the course of the inspection. And this ties in with something a contributor earlier said. Every single comment was negative. They hadn't written down any positive points. It was like they'd gone in, how can we shut this school down? Let's note down everything that's negative. That's what their notes were.
And they're not looking for...
James, they didn't want to let us see those notes.
No, it sounds almost as if they picked the wrong school, but ultimately you were done by the finances, but by the money of it. So systemically speaking, there needs to be oversight. Would we not expect Amanda Spielman to provide oversight of Ofsted, or would you need a?
There should be. I mean, you came up with the Latin phrase "who guards the guards." The truth is, there should be an independent review mechanism enabling schools that feel that they've been done a bad deal to say, look, these are the reasons, and for that to be looked at independently, but it's not done independently. It's just Ofsted. It's like the police in the old days saying, well, we find nothing wrong here.
Yes.
And that's what must frustrate. I mean, as a governor, I felt, and a lawyer,
must have been extraordinarily
frustrating.
So frustrating. And of course, with experience, especially with the chair that you've described, with experience outside of the education system being so different, even a mystery shopper, someone has just texted me, Roy, even a mystery shopper report gives you a right to reply and takes outside factors into consideration.
And the interesting thing also, James, is that our chair, who works quite senior in the Environment Agency, said that he'd dealt with loads of judicial reviews and the Environment Agency was always very open. Our barrister said, who was an expert in judicial review proceedings, he said, I have never come across a public body which is so resistant to revealing information about itself. So disclosure was a nightmare. They kept on saying, no. And we had to go to the judge again and again, say,
and most schools are not going to have the inclination or the personnel or the resources to pursue it as you did, and even your attempts to pursue it were scuppered in the end. And 2019, so 4 years or 3 years later, the worst happened at another school. Partly, the coroner concluded, as a consequence of an Ofsted inspection. I mean, it does sound horribly unfit for purpose. But does that lead to agreement with the union's call for a temporary cessation, a halt to inspections? Roy, thank you. Incredibly detailed account of one experience. Obviously, the phone lines are open for positive experiences, but they're thin on the ground at the moment. Matt's in Leicester. Matt, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It's a whole host of things, really, I think, with the stress. I was a primary school teacher for 10 years, and I left just before the pandemic, and I'm now chair of governors at the same school. So I've kind of been through Ofsted on both sides.
Yes.
And I think part of the problem when you're a teacher is that there is no information. So you're going through these 2 days of absolute stress, but you're getting nothing back. You don't know whether it's going well. You don't know whether it's going terribly. You don't know what they think about your lesson. You get a little bit of feedback, but it's never a huge amount. And I think the the stress is exponential. So the government put stress on Ofsted. They then put a little bit more stress onto the head teachers, who then put a little bit more pressure onto the teachers, and so it just kind of builds up and builds up. And the goalposts constantly change as well, and the rules.
Do we understand, apart from the resources being restricted and fewer inspectors coming in, do we know how it's ended up in such a mess?
I think the fact that we've had, 760 education secretaries in the last 10 years.
You weren't a maths teacher, were you, Matt?
No. But I think that is part of the problem. There are schools in our area who are outstanding and haven't had an inspection for 10, 15 years in some cases, because they were outstanding before and they've just been left. And like somebody said before, complacency creeps in. And if you think how many secretaries we have had since then, how many changes we've had in that 10 years.
Yes.
And then they're getting caught out, and they're coming in and they're dropping from outstanding down to serious weaknesses, down to requires improvement, because they haven't been assessed. Now, I was a union rep as well while I was a teacher, and I think there does need to be accountability.
Yes, of
there
course.
needs to be some sort of monitoring.
But it's utterly inconsistent. It's utterly inconsistent.
Exactly. To put it in the footballing terms that we all love, it is like VAR in many ways, even down to the fact that there is no appeal and there is this secrecy around kind of what their decision was based on. It is a lot
like an opaqueness. I didn't need to crack on because I've got Keir Starmer on the other side of the bracket. If it's like VAR, we need to find out what Gary Lineker thinks. That never causes any problems, does it? If it's like VAR. Matt, thank you, mate. It is 11:44.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:48 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The UK Climate Minister, who you can't possibly name, if you can name him, I'll give you the money myself, Graham Stewart, leading the UK negotiating team at COP28, has flown out of Dubai, it is being reported by the environment editor of the Times newspaper, Adam Vaughan, for a vote on immigration back home. So as the climate talks go into overtime, and the consensus really among experts is that the planet is in a state of emergency, the UK Climate Minister has been ordered to fly home because the UK Prime Minister is so worried about a vote on deporting a couple of hundred refugees to Rwanda, a remarkable illustration of the state that we're in. And speaking of refugees, it does appear to be the case that an asylum seeker on the Bibi Stockholm, did you even know that people had moved back onto the Bibi Stockholm barge, the last great totem of Tory immigration policy? Did you even know that? Because they had to move off after Legionella, I think, was found in the air conditioning system or something like that. Well, humans had moved back on, and one of them has been found dead. Police obviously investigating that incident. We are expecting the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, at any moment. So I will go to Elizabeth in Redbridge on the question of Ofsted, with a warning that I will interrupt you almost certainly in a very abrupt and unfair fashion. Elizabeth, what would you like to say?
Hi, morning. I've been a teacher for nearly 30 years, and just you talking about Ofsted has sent me in a cold sweat and really literally has made me feel quite sick. Gosh. It is possibly the most unpleasant experience that anyone can ever go through. And part of the problem actually is the build-up to Ofsted coming. So you no longer get a lot of notice that Ofsted are coming. Now you get a phone call the afternoon before they're going to arrive. So you expect a phone call either, Ofsted are due because they're coming every 5 years or so. And then you're either going to get a phone call on the Monday afternoon or the Tuesday afternoon to say they're going to be in the following morning. And it's a bit like, when you've just had a baby and you go to sleep those first few nights and you're constantly on alert.
I do know that. Yeah, you don't actually have to have given birth to feel this way, do you? No, I do remember what you describe. It's you can't quite think you're ever going to sleep deeply again.
You never again. You're constantly waiting for the baby to cry. And that's what you're doing. You're constantly waiting for the phone call to say that Ofsted are coming. And so within the school, there's really a hideous build-up of tension and suspension from SLT, really putting a lot of pressure on staff. And so that's just a horrible situation to be constantly in. So you're already feeling, stressed because you are just waiting for this thing to happen.
Why is it so horrible? Why is it so stressful? Why is it so awful?
Okay, so if you've been teaching in a school where the SLT, the senior leadership, are really, really strong, it's not quite as bad because they're so rigorous that you would have been having regular mocksteads, you would have been observed regularly, everything will really be in place. But if you were in a school where the SLT were not as rigorous, then it's almost like you're in a situation where they're suddenly realising there's a lot of things that we didn't have in place that we have to get in place. Yeah. And so, have we got lesson plans all really rigorously done? Do we have all our policies
So you
in place?
you get it from both sides. It's tough enough working with a weak senior leadership team, but on top of that, when Ofsted turn up, the weakness of the senior leadership team will add to the trauma created by the Ofsted inspection. Elizabeth, I did warn you that I would cut you off abruptly and unfairly when the leader of the Labour Party became available, Keir Starmer, currently in Milton Keynes, where he has delivered an important speech explaining just how much the Labour Party has changed since he became leader. Who is the message aimed at, Keir Starmer?
It's aimed very firmly at the country and at voters. When you lose... Today is obviously the 4-year anniversary, if you can believe it, of that terrible loss by the Labour Party in 2019. And when you lose that badly, the worst result for us since 1935, you don't look at the electorate and say, what were you doing? You look at your party and you change it. And that's what we have done. And we've changed it fundamentally to a country of service, to a party of service, ready to govern. And I can't help but observe that whilst we've been busy moving in the direction of country first, the Tory party has been moving in the opposite direction. And many people who will have voted Conservative in the past, I think, will feel that their party has drifted away from them, a bit like Labour voters did back in 2019, and that that's why I've been saying to them, we've got a mission, and a decade of national renewal is what we need after this 13 years of decline. And we hope that people who not only traditionally vote Labour, but who might be thinking of voting Labour for possibly the first time, will join us in that mission of national renewal.
What do you think turned people off in 2019? And were you aware of it when you were campaigning to govern under Jeremy Corbyn?
I think I'd say two things. We drifted too far from our core purpose, which was as a party set up to serve working people. We drifted too far from that. We also, James, we turned into a party that was having an internal discussion with itself and not focused on the voters and the country. And that's why we had to turn the party inside out. We'd been drifting for a while. I mean, 2019 was the worst result. But of course, we had lost 3 general elections before that as well. And that's why we've moved with such pace to change the Labour Party in the 4 short years that we've had since that general election result.
So you had, I think you did say in the speech that it wasn't just under Jeremy Corbyn, but it had been drifting for a while. Did you run this by Ed Miliband before you gave the speech?
No, and I'm not having a go at Ed by any shape or means. He's a very good colleague. He's one of the central mission drivers. We've got a mission, obviously, to get to clean power by 2030. Really hard to do, but vitally important. And Ed is leading for that. But I mean, I don't want to ignore the fact that we've lost 4 elections in a row, and pretending that it was just one, dark winter night 4 years ago today.
So where is
I don't think it's realistic.
Where is there more clear blue water, between you and the Labour Party of 2019, or between you and the Conservative Party of 2023?
Oh, there's blue water between both. I mean, between where we were in 2019 and where we are now as a Labour Party, we are a fundamentally, totally changed party.
Well,
and I think
in terms of the policy offer, where are the most fundamental changes?
Well, then if you go to the policy offer, and particularly on the difference, because people then say, well, what's the difference between you and the Tories? Well, I'll tell you the difference. Firstly, we're absolutely mission-driven, this sense that we've got a driving sense of purpose, not the sticking plaster politics we've seen, that what we want to do with that is to get economic growth, wealth creation across all of the country, in every place across the country, not just in some places. We want to go for clean power by 2030. This is to embrace what we have to do with the climate obligation and turn it into a set of opportunities. As we are going towards that opportunity, Rishi Sunak is retreating from that. You can see that in what he's been doing over the last few months. We want to pick up the NHS, put it back on its feet and make it fit for the next 75 years, fundamentally different to where the Tories are on this. We want to smash the class ceiling and make sure every child has the chance to go as far as their talents will take them. I'm still shocked, will always be shocked, that in 2023 more children will have their futures determined by their parents' salary or income than by their own talents. And then also making our streets making sure our streets are safe, communities are safe, and within that fifth mission, halving the violence against women and girls. That is a huge. No government, no oppositional government has ever committed to that before. So, there's blue water between the Labour Party now and the Labour Party that lost dreadfully 4 years ago. There is absolutely blue water between us and the Tories in terms of the direction of travel, where we want to go, and the ambition, frankly, of the country.
I wonder whether your speech will be overshadowed slightly by events in Westminster, and whether events in Westminster will be slightly overshadowed by news that an asylum seeker has died on the Bibby Stockholm barge.
Yeah, I mean, just on both those points. Firstly, yes, of course, the circus is back in town in Westminster with the Labour Party in this sort of self-indulgent vortex of nothingness, where they're sort of dragged towards, woke, wedge, where can we find divides. They've got into that political space. Meanwhile, we're just a few weeks from Christmas. We're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Many families won't have the Christmas they want because they can't afford it. The NHS has got 7.7 million people on the waiting list and rising. And next year, 2024, as we turn into it, 2.3 million mortgage holders who are on fixed mortgages will be paying hundreds of pounds more per month because of the damage that the Tories have done to the economy. So there's a sort of reality gap between the real world and the Tories' self-indulgent grandstanding and star chambers, all about positioning themselves for the future and having a fight amongst themselves, and what's going on for millions of people across the country. On your second point, James, I mean, I'm not... this has broken this morning, and all I can say is my heart goes out to the family of the person who has died this morning, the asylum seeker, as a human being. That is my first emotion. And I don't know the full circumstances because I've been in my speech this morning, but whatever the circumstances, my heart goes out to the family and friends of the poor individual who has lost their lives.
Thank you. I took a call from John in Shepton Mallet earlier this week. He's never ever voted any other way but Labour, but he said you'd lost his vote after your praise for Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, well, I mean, I hope he actually read what I said about that, because I am absolutely determined that we need mission-driven government, a government with a real sense of purpose, not drifting like we are at the moment. And I was giving examples of leaders since the war who've had that sense of mission. Obviously, Attlee, who had the mission for a new Jerusalem, if you like, rebuilding after the war. Obviously, Tony Blair in 97, the mission of the optimism of turning into a new century. But also Thatcher had a mission. Now, I personally disagree with her mission. I disagree with what she did. That doesn't stop me saying that she had a sense of plan and mission, unlike the drift that we've had in the last 13 years. And I defy anybody to tell me what the defining mission or purpose has been of the last 13 years. With Attlee, with Thatcher and Blair, you could say what they were trying to achieve. Now, with Thatcher, I completely disagree with what she was trying to achieve. But I'm comparing and contrasting with the last 13 years, and almost as a statement of intent, saying I intend the next Labour government, if we're privileged enough to come in to serve, to be mission-driven and to fix the fundamentals, and not swan around pretending that sticking plasters are going to do it.
So, Keir Starmer, many thanks. I know you've got a tight schedule, but there are a couple of other questions I shall save until the next time. The time now is 1 minute after 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's coming up to 5 minutes after 12. All 198 countries at COP28 have to agree with each other. Otherwise, there is no deal. And no deal is not better. And our minister, the leader of the UK delegation, has just hopped on a plane to come home so that he can vote in this Rwanda bill, which the debate starts in about 35 to 40 minutes. It's scheduled to start at about 12:40, but the vote, I'll tell you what, we'll get Natasha Clark to talk us through the timetable and what is not likely to happen today. But I don't think the vote is until this evening. I'm going to talk next about why is it such a fact. Can I do a topic on why it's such an interesting topic? Would that be too meta even for the time that we spend together, even for one of our 12 o'clock slightly more light-hearted conversations? Not always, just sometimes. I'm looking at news that customers are more likely to buy plant-based food when they are not labelled as vegan. So if they took a food gift basket, labelled it vegan, and 20% of people chose it. When they labelled it healthy and sustainable food, 44% of people opted for the same basket. It's an interesting piece of research at the University of Southern California, and it was part of a national food choice experiment to determine how people respond to labels such as vegan and plant-based compared to healthy, sustainable, or healthy and sustainable. It's all emerged at the annual conference of the Society for Risk Analysis. The other basket was a food gift basket without meat and dairy, and another with meat and dairy. So that's the interesting bit, really. The one without meat and dairy attracted 20% of participants when it was labelled vegan and 27% when it was labelled plant-based. It comes at the same time that Heather Mills, you remember her, the former wife of Paul McCartney, who set up a very successful, I think, vegan food company called V-Bites. They sold, I think, 25% of it to the German food company that owns hula hoops. And it's gone under. She's blamed the gaslighting. Well, if you read the Daily Telegraph, she's blamed the gaslighting meat industry for the collapse of her vegan food empire. If you read what she actually said a little later in the coverage, she considers Brexit to be a large contributor to the problem as well. But there's something in the wind here, isn't there? Don't you think? There's something in the wind, and I'm a little bit surprised by it. And I don't know that it can be explained by simple sort of the world turning explanations. What am I talking about? I'm talking about a sense that I think is accurate, but which you are certainly free to challenge. I'm talking about a sense that the feeling we had, what would you say, 3 or 4 years ago? 5 years ago? So no, only three to 4 years ago, that vegetarianism and veganism were on the march. I think that sense is dissipated, and I don't really know why. Heather Mills thinks that it is because of very deliberate campaigns by the meat and dairy industries, and she adds, sadly backed by select celebrities who, in my view, should take their responsibilities as influencers much more seriously. I'll quote her now. Many of the campaigns we are seeing, such as the Got Milk campaign by the dairy industry, joking about plant milk, insulting lactose-intolerant people, as well as ethical, environmental, animal lovers, are well-funded gaslighting initiatives that detract from the facts and sow the seeds of doubt in consumers who deserve to know the truth. The plant-based industry, she says, if you've got to fight fire with fire. The plant-based industry needs to take a lead from the dairy industry in unifying its voice as a force for good and promotion of the facts, as opposed to a litany of lies and misinformation. It's not the only company to have had problems. Nestlé has axed some of its vegan products. We talked not long ago about how supermarkets have cut back the number of specifically vegan lines that they sell. Pret-a-Manger has closed most of its veggie Pret stores. See, this is what I mean by the tide that seemed to be raging just 3 or 4 years ago. The Pret-a-Manger stores that were specifically vegetarian. The supermarket aisles that were absolutely rammed with vegan products, specifically labelled vegan products. Then you've got the sausage maker Heck that cut its range of vegan products from 15 down to 2 earlier this year, with the founder saying the public somehow wasn't quite ready for it yet. Why has this happened? I mean, you're welcome to challenge my suggestion that the mood seems to have changed, the tide seems to have ebbed, but if you accept my analysis that the whole vegan-vegetarian march seems to have halted, why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Have we been manipulated? You know, I don't need much convincing about the power of lobbies. I find these weird, bogus libertarians, they call themselves libertarians while they're essentially shilling for organisations that spend millions and millions and millions of pounds trying to influence our choices, opposed to organisations that don't have any money at all to spend on influencing our choices. So when's the last time you saw a luscious advert encouraging you to drink tap water, for example, as opposed to a luscious advert encouraging you to drink carbonated corn syrup? And yet you'll find some bogus libertarian working for a so-called think tank who claims that it's outrageous that people want to take away freedom of choice. And they're almost certainly trousering checks from the carbonated corn syrup lobby at the same time. I saw one the other day, and it said, oh, yes, you don't think people are capable of reaching healthy decisions for themselves without government intervention. I thought, have you even heard of cigarettes? Are you aware of why one of the biggest killers of humans has been whipped into retreat in this country over the last couple of decades? You think that happened through freedom of choice? Or do you think that happened because of legislation surrounding advertising and labelling and public health pronouncements? So anyone who ever says to you the freedom of choice needs to answer 2 questions. Number 1, have you ever heard of cigarettes? And number 2, where's the budget for encouraging people to make healthy choices? Where's the lettuce budget? Because the other story that caught my eye this morning was about health inequality. Well, there were 2, actually. There was a story about the poorer family being the most likely to have the worst diet, which wasn't a major shock for reasons that we've discussed on the programme quite a lot. But the health inequality, the risk of dying from cancer in some poorer parts of England is now more than 70% higher than it is in wealthy areas. And a part of that process will be diet and other lifestyle issues. But the question of why the vegetarian what's the word I want? Crusade? The vegetarian vegan crusade 3 years ago was working brilliantly. It was really marching forwards. And today it's not. What's happened in your view? 0345 6060 973. Now, you may have an immediate answer for me on this, because you have been following it quite closely, whether through your personal preferences on diet or whether because, like Heather Mills, you're in the industry, you're connected to the sort of hospitality world. But the question of why, I thought that the tipping point had been reached. I genuinely did. I think you could probably tell in the way that I talked about it on the radio. I honestly thought that you go to an adventure playground and there's got a giant seesaw and you walk up it quite slowly and then you reach the point where it begins to tip. I thought we'd reached that point and that the tipping towards much more widespread vegetarianism and veganism had been achieved. And yet all of those examples that I've given you, up to and including Heather Mills blaming the gaslighting meat industry for the collapse of her vegan food empire, they would all seem to suggest that the tipping point, it toppled a bit and it just had that little wobble, and then we sort of stepped backwards and the seesaw went back to where it was when it started. Maybe it's still toppling, I don't know. But that's my question for you. Why had that seemingly unstoppable march towards much more widespread vegetarianism and veganism, why has it apparently, slowed and or halted? You can choose which verb you prefer. It's slowed down quite a lot, or it has halted altogether. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need, because it has taken me by surprise, that so much so that I'm prepared to give Heather Mills the benefit of the doubt and wonder whether she's right. Actually, there has been a sort of successful surreptitious social engineering underway that has turned us against vegetarianism and veganism, even as we thought that the battle was almost over. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 80 minutes after 12. So why has the enthusiasm for vegan and vegetarian food waned so noticeably? Let's go to Gateshead. Daniel is there. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hiya there, James. I opened up a coffee shop in Gateshead 8 months ago.
I remember. It's in the park. It's in the park.
It is, yes, in Stockwell Park, yes.
There we go. Say that again more slowly so that people can come and see you.
Yeah, so it's Prism Coffee in Saltwell Park, Gateshead.
There you go.
Gateshead's first ever specialty coffee shop.
Fantastic.
So what a lot of people don't know is that pretty much everything that I sell is vegan.
Okay.
So it's not something that I advertise. A really, really big core of what I do here is to try and prove...
There's another dog in the background. I can't believe it. It's like Crufts today, this programme.
So a lot of what I do here is to prove that there are kind of sustainable alternatives to kind of everyday things. So a lot of people see the mulled apple crumble cake, or the winter cake, or the stollen buns. They see all the sausage rolls, etc.
Can you call it a sausage roll if there's no sausage involved?
Well, you can't call it a meat sausage roll, but a sausage is a form, not an ingredient.
Yeah, otherwise, I suppose. Like a sausage dog, says Keith. Yes, I take your point.
So, same way as a burger or patty, they're just forms, right? So
do you think there's a stigma then attached to the word vegan that wasn't there 5 years ago? Or maybe it was there all along. They backed the wrong horse, all these companies that went all in on vegan lines and vegan
It's
products.
always been there, and it's interesting because I think, like most of what's happened, everything's kind of polarized.
Yeah, maybe.
So for example, in the first week I opened, I'll never forget this. I knew I did the right thing because I had this slightly older gentleman come up, and he was just like, so I do oat milk as standard, and then cow's milk is an option. People can request it.
Yes.
And he's like, no, I don't want any of that rubbish. I want proper milk. Proper milk in my coffee, please. And then proceeded to order 2 sausage rolls, sat down, shoved them down his throat. I had a really long queue, and he proceeded to go to everyone in the queue to say, best pork sausage roll I've ever had.
Well, that is it. So he just thought he'd eat a meat, and to be fair, I've had a couple of vegan sausage rolls, and you would struggle to tell the difference. I like this a lot. What you don't recognise then the idea that it's declined. They're just not buying the stuff in the supermarkets and the processed stuff.
So one of the things that I told your producer is that there's definitely been there is a slightly more kind of acute awareness around ultra-processed foods. Yeah. And kind of like a year and a half ago, there was a really massive kind of thing. Everyone was going crazy for all the vegan doner kebab meat and the vegan turkey
and then
crowns
Chris
and,
Van Tulleken's book
things.
came out, didn't it? And everybody sort of woke up to the danger of eating too much ultra-processed food. I think you're probably right. I think that's going to prove to be a big part of what we're talking about. Before you go, Daniel, how is business?
It's pretty good. I've a slight weather dependency, so
yes, of course you have.
I'm a bit of an amateur. This is my first business, etc. So I'm trying to kind of tackle the whole Christmas thing and whatnot. But so far, so good. Just trying to get my first year under my belt.
Well, good luck, seriously, and I'm happy to give you a little bit of support there. Speaking of the weather, the storm clouds are gathering over Westminster, both metaphorically And meteorologically, actually, with this looming vote, Natasha Clark is with us just to talk us through what's going to happen later today. The debate starts in about 20 minutes, but the vote will not be for several hours.
Yeah, that's right. The Home Secretary, James Cleverly, will be opening the debate this afternoon, and we're not expecting a vote until around 7pm tonight on Rishi Sunak's second reading of his Rwanda safety bill. Now, obviously, Tory MPs hold up today in Westminster discussing whether or not they're going to back it.
Well, the One Nation lot, who there were worries that they might think it was too unpleasant policy, they've essentially fallen into line, so we can just about put up with this. But do they really call themselves the Five Families?
I don't think they do. I think that's maybe something lovely newspaper columnists have labelled them.
You have to hope not, although I wouldn't put anything past Mark Francois and his mates. They are not yet clear on whether or not. Is there enough of them to sink the whole bill?
There are, but I just don't think that they're going to. I don't think there's going to be enough of them putting their heads over the parapet, as it were.
And do they move as one like they did during Brexit?
That's what they're discussing today, whether they abstain on the motion, on the vote today, or they decide to vote it down completely. Now, at the moment, you can't amend it because it's only second reading. So in order to amend it and either toughen it up or loosen it a bit, you're going to have to wait for the third reading and for the committee stages, which come later on. But, if the Prime Minister has no intention of doing so, you kind of, if you're a Tory MP, you're going to go, well, why don't we just kill this thing now if we don't think it's going to get any better? That's the argument that those guys are weighing up today. And you're right, the One Nationists have decided to essentially to hold their noses and say, we don't think this breaks international law. Now, whether or not they privately think maybe it will or not. And I personally was looking at some of the legal advice yesterday, and there are things in there that they could unpick. It says it may meet international laws.
Vulnerable to international law.
Exactly. So it's not that clear cut. I would have said some of them would have come out and said, we're not quite happy about this. But I think they realise that this is probably going to get amended in the House of Lords and probably will go in the favour of the One Nation Conservatives in order to weaken it a little bit in the eyes of the Tory right in the coming weeks and months to come when that bill does come back over Christmas. So it's going to be a Christmas nightmare for the Prime Minister as he tries to
But
figure
the
this all out.
expectation is, certainly Keir Starmer has said this morning, that tonight's vote will go the government's way.
I think that seems to be the consensus, unless we've all been wrong before, unless there is a shock surprise and they all decide en masse. I think Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman will be quite crucial in deciding which way they go, and at the moment we have no indication of whether they would abstain.
Doesn't Jenrick have to vote against it because he resigned in protest at it?
He will either abstain or vote against, and that's what they're deciding, and they haven't quite made up their mind, or at least if they have, they haven't told us about it.
And is there a result which would constitute a technical victory for Rishi Sunak but leave his leadership massively weakened?
Absolutely. I think last night people were sort of trying to predict where this was going to go, and they were saying maybe 10 to 20 abstentions. I think personally, if he gets 20 abstentions, that's a serious threat for him. And if they do vote en masse, there's up to 40 of them. If all 40 of them either vote against or abstain, that's going to look pretty poor. And it's a real signal to the Prime Minister that you've got to do something, or there's a potential that they could vote it down at a later date. It's a bit of a warning shot for him.
And how many letters of no confidence are needed at the moment?
It's around 50. It depends on the amount of Tory MPs that we have, and they, as you know, they keep falling off, dropping like flies. I think it's around 50-51, and I think the consensus seems to be that there's maybe around 20-25 in already. So it doesn't seem like we're anywhere near that, and that is obviously just a guess. We don't know many people that have publicly said. I think Andrea Jenkins has said recently she's got a confidence letter in, but most Tory MPs do not tell us when they're putting those letters in.
She used her best crayons. Thank you, Natasha Clark. That vote, that debate, as we say, due to start in about 15 minutes' time. In that vote, 7ish tonight or later?
I think we're expecting the vote to be around 7:15 and the result to be around 7:30.
Thank you very much. Back to this vexed question of why the vegan and vegetarian craze that seemed to be engulfing the country not that long ago is now in abeyance. Sharon is in Milford in Surrey. Sharon, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I have 2 vegan sons, and they won't eat any ready-made or processed food, vegan meals. But the reason is because they're thinking about what goes into their food all the time. They want to be healthy. They want to keep fit. So they like to cook from scratch. Their girlfriends are both vegan. All their friends are vegan. I don't think that that it's not as popular as it used to be. I just think that, especially the young generation, they are so, thinking about what goes into their food and a healthy body.
Yes, I get it. So it is the sort of stuff in the freezer section and the stuff in the supermarket in the colourful boxes that might be vegan and or vegetarian that people are turning away from, but it doesn't mean they're turning away from vegan and or vegetarian food. Until we come to the second bit of the story, which is that customers are more likely to buy plant-based foods when they are not labelled as vegan. So there is some stigma attached to the V word, I think.
I mean, I think there's always been a stigma. There's a stigma now. I mean, whenever I say my sons are vegan or I was vegan for a while, I get that look, oh my God, that sort of thing, as I'm going to preach to them, about it all the time, which, to be honest with you, my two sons are infuriating. They're constantly preaching to me about it. But, I just think that the biggest issue is what goes in those meals, and the youngsters thinking about that. And also, the prices of it is ridiculous.
Yes.
There's never any offers on it.
No, so why would you? Cost of living as well, I suppose. You're going to be able to mash up your own stuff and cook up your own stuff much
100%,
when you're looking at the bills all the time. Thank you, Sharon. Did you know, even as someone who recognised what an absolute prat he was on this issue, catch yourself sounding like one of those people who overweight men who bang on about how ridiculous vegetarianism is. Very much one of those back in the day. But even as someone who's worked to improve in that field, when she said then that you can see people's eyes go when you say you're a vegan, I do know what she means. I put some effort into trying to work out where this came from once for my last book, not the one that's out now, the one before. And I think it's shame and guilt. I think it is the knowledge that these people are actually more virtuous than you. And I use the word virtuous quite loosely. You do not eat meat. Somewhere deep inside, we love to revel in our reputation as a nation of animal lovers, when in fact we're a nation of animal munchers. And there is a cognitive dissonance probably involved in that. So when someone says vegan, I think we feel judged, even though many vegans are not judgy. Some are, but many are not. I think when someone, that's why Sharon describes the eyes, seeing it in the eyes, that sense that you, oh yeah, right, get you then. Because you are conceding less virtue to somebody else, even though they're not trying to proselytise or preach. I think that's quite a large part of it. I think shame is such a big driver. And I know what I'm talking about here because I was raised as a Catholic. Shame is such a big driver of human behaviour and one that we very, very rarely talk about. It's 12:30 and Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:33. I wonder if Rolf in Liverpool has a point. He says, I think it's a reaction to the slightly woke implications of veganism. Well, I think that fits with what I was saying about virtue. People who describe themselves as anti-woke are often ashamed of their lack of virtue. And some people who describe themselves as woke, of course, are sometimes not that virtuous. They just like to pat themselves on the back for being so. But I think that works on both fronts, actually. Slight change, a profound change of pace now. You will be aware, I presume, and if you're not, then more homework for you, of the triple lock, a vital measure of providing economic security for pensioners over the last decade, making sure that what pensioners receive from the state every week is tied to what they are going to be required to pay out in order to maintain a certain standard of living. You will not yet, I don't imagine, have heard of a triple key of financial commitments from government. That is what the country's first and longest serving children's charity is calling for. I speak of Corum, a charity very close to my heart, that has published its Charter for Children, calling for precisely that, calling effectively for a realignment of the social contract between society and its children. Carol Homden is the chief executive of Corum, which, for those of you who don't know, is a growing group of charities and organisations supporting hundreds of thousands of children in almost every imaginable way, as well as offering support to I can't say older children or younger people, but you know roughly what I mean by that, and families every single year. So what is What has happened to the social contract, Carol, and why does it need to be realigned?
What has happened, James, is that children have drawn the short straw. Over the last decade and compounded by the pandemic, children are now struggling to find their way to the future, both in terms of their skills, their security and their equality in society. And we all know as parents that the most important thing that we can do is ensure that our children have the best possible chance in life. And this needs to change now.
And this changes through financial commitment from government.
Yes, we believe that it is not sufficient only to talk about intervention, that it is necessary to talk about the bedrock on which children's futures are built. And that, of course, means that we need to nourish children, educate children, and ensure that they feel safe and secure wherever they are. So we're really looking for fundamental principles to be applied, that children have a fair share of our national resources, that they have an equal chance no matter who they are or where they live, and that they have that security of place and the people who support them. This is achievable, and it is a realistic call that we could do the same for children as we have rightly done for our most vulnerable old people.
So how would it work? And how would the money which you describe as being less than a penny in the pound, between 0.6 and 0.7% of national joint national income, how would it reach, or how would its benefits, the benefits that it brought, reach and impact on children directly?
Well, we all know that children depend uniquely on the support of their families and on school and education. And these mechanisms are very well established. They are not that difficult for government to apply. So it's really a policy and an economic decision and commitment to increase the resources for our children through schools, and to increase the resources for children who depend upon the benefit system.
So what are we talking about in schools? What would change for a child? What are they currently not having access to or benefiting from that you want to see more of?
Well, we certainly want to see more children having access to a more rounded curriculum, and but most of all, the important thing is that schools have the resources that they need to make the decisions for the children in their area. And we have seen contractions in terms of the support children receive for creative curriculum, for example. The investment in personal, social and health education is absolutely vital. We have now 1 in 5 children facing a probable mental health crisis at some point in their young lives. Well, these things can be addressed, but schools are best placed to make the decisions locally through a simple mechanism if resources increase. We need to reform early education and childcare and make sure beyond the current commitments that every child can access a childcare place. There is very significant insufficiency, and particularly for children with special educational needs and disabilities.
So, well, you will know better than I do that was cited as one of the reasons last week why so many councils are going bust. So there's almost a political mood abroad that they should be turning down the dial on some of those provisions, as opposed to, as you're calling for, turning it up.
Well, I wonder why it is that we need to make the case that early investment is a better investment. Do we not all know that as parents? And certainly that a small amount of help early is very likely to turn the tide of more expensive help later. Not always, of course, because some children face very significant difficulties. But if we simply deny the issues that children face, then we do so at our peril.
You mentioned, well, I know that the charity's been around since the 18th century, 1739, when Thomas Corum set it up, and the Foundling Hospital that he founded, some people listening will know of through the Jacqueline Wilson novels about Hetty Feather. But the experiences, anyone who's been to the Foundling Museum near Russell Square will know that the world has changed a lot. What struck me about the press release I saw earlier was you saying that things in some areas, although obviously life is significantly better for children than it was in 1739, in some areas, some of the things you watch and you measure, things have even gone backwards in the last few years.
They have gone backwards, I'm afraid, since our current progress since the war.
Right.
So since the Second World War, the outcomes for children were progressively improving. But now this is not true on our watch. We are not seeing that progressive improvement, and we are seeing new types of health and mental health challenges that we must respond to. Of course, things are infinitely better than they were when Thomas Corum walked the streets, but we still have children who are at risk on the streets, usually in their late adolescence. We still have children in our society without recourse to public funds. We still have children who can't depend upon a hot meal each day.
You've launched, it's a slightly dirty word on this programme, but there are good think tanks, as well as the secretly funded lobby groups masquerading as think tanks. The Corum Institute for Children will clearly fit into the former category. What is that designed to do?
It's designed to help us all to come together to shift this dial, to actually look at what we need to commit to as a society and how we need to do it. So I think the thing that is different is that it's astonishing that there is no dedicated centre, except for Corum, really, that is combining uniquely the multidisciplinary approach that's necessary to address the challenges that children face, and it is uniquely focused upon them.
Specifically to children, that's what makes you unique.
That's what makes it unique. And also the fact that we hope we speak because we do. Yes. And so actually this is about saying how. There is excellent research. There is wonderful work that is done by many charities that are sister organisations to us. But the question of how you affect sustainable change for every child across the country and that they do not fall into the postcode lottery, that is the question and challenge for us for the next generation.
And these would be evidence-based solutions to the challenges that you face, or that children and young people face in policy, law and practice. So feeding into the Charter, effectively, they become like a symbiotic relationship between...
That's right. And at the heart of it needs to be the experience of children and young people today, not only the experience of those of us who were once a child.
And it's a call... Because there's always a tension, isn't there? I forget who it was, possibly Aneurin Bevan, who spoke of charity in very negative terms. Essentially, a civilised society shouldn't need charity, which might be true, but if we don't have it, then, you know, there's nothing. If Corum wasn't there, I dread to think about how lives of all the children you've helped might have unfolded over since 1739, in fact. But this is sort of a combination of two, isn't it? You're calling on the government to free up money that the government already receives and reallocate and redirect it towards ensuring longer-term solutions to problems that face children.
That's exactly right,
But why
James.
does it need doing? It sounds like a bleeding obvious thing to do when you put it like that.
It does. And I think one of the reasons we're publishing this charter is to remind ourselves of the commitments that we as a society have. We've lost focus on it. We need to refocus and we need to allocate a greater share. But it's going to take more than one parliament, more than one sector, and more than one generation.
How can people find out more about this in particular and about Corum in general?
People can find out more at corum.org.uk. And please do take a look and support this charter in every way that you can.
It's an extraordinary organisation, I can say that. And the charter is just the latest chapter in an incredible story. Carol Homden, thank you for coming in today and good luck with it.
Thank you, James.
It is coming up to 1:45. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Some of the stuff ties in with this, actually, on stuff like diet and food. The poorer families much more likely to have health problems later in life. And Carol's point, I mean, even if you just look at the story today about health inequality, meaning a chance of fatal cancer rises 70% in poorer areas. If you can change early in those lives, behaviours and knowledge levels, then society benefits financially later in life because you're not spending money on treatment and care. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:48 is the time. That rather splendid Larry the Cat Twitter account, which is not actually written by the Downing Street Cat, has responded to that remarkable story this morning about Conservative MPs having a crucial breakfast. I wonder if it was a patriotic breakfast. Do you remember Yes, happy days. A crucial breakfast with Rishi Sunak. All the usual suspects. 30p Lee, Danny Kruger, Miriam Cates. Larry the Cat has tweeted, 2 of them complained about a lack of Cocoa Pops, and one chucked the croissants in the bin, calling them foreign muck. Which is good parody, but unfortunately it's incredibly close to, well, very, very close to believable, isn't it? 12:49 is the time. Staying with food matters. I don't know. I mean, listen, if there's 2 stories here that I've probably not correctly distinguished between. Why would customers be more likely to buy plant-based foods when they are not labelled as vegan? So the sense that the march towards veganism and vegetarianism was inexorable has gone. I think 3 years ago, possibly even less, it felt as if the tipping point had been passed and that we were all going to be living much, much more plant-based lives. Now, separately from that, the processed plant-based products have declined enormously in popularity. There was an early spike, but as the founder of Heck, the sausage maker, has said, the public just wasn't ready for it. They didn't want all that veg in a sausage. So the stuff, the pre-made stuff, whether it's ultra-processed or not, the pre-made stuff has lost in popularity. But that doesn't explain what I would call a stigma issue. When a food basket was labelled vegan, 20% of people chose it, but when it was labelled healthy and sustainable, 44% of people chose it. So that is a stigma. Why? Why is that there? So it's not just about the fake meats that a few of you are picking up on. Sam in Glastonbury says it's too expensive, James. I don't buy the fake meats unless they're in the reduced section, which is quite often as they're not selling very well. But I'm not going to pay £4 for 2 fake burgers. No, but that's a different thing. My fault. I've set them up as if they were part of the same story, but they're 2 different stories. I'm interested also in the stigma element of this. Why would you be more likely to pick something up if it said healthy and sustainable on it than you would be if it said vegan? Jacob's in Warrington. Jacob, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Well, I actually was thinking more along the lines of the cost of it. I know you just touched on it, saying it's more about the stigma, and I agree with that. But I do think it's quite an important element that I think when that movement happened, a lot of people didn't make the full transition into being vegan, but they did decide that they wanted to cut down. And a big part of that is saying, okay, well, instead of getting cow's milk in my coffee, I'll get an oat milk. But when it costs 50p more, I think less and less people want to do that nowadays.
Yes. Yes, so simply prioritising pennies over, I don't want to say principles because that sounds a bit judgy, but prioritising pennies over, can we call it a luxury choice? Kind of?
I think for some people you can. I think for me, myself, I went vegan 5 years ago, and once I'd made that decision, I knew I wasn't going back. But for a lot of people who just want to do their bit, sometimes, I don't know, maybe, for a lot of people it's more important to watch the pennies.
We've forgotten something as well, and it's very easy to forget, Liz Truss. And in fact, someone pointed out earlier that when I said that we hadn't had, there wasn't any budget for lettuce advertising, someone pointed out we'd actually had a lettuce budget, and it almost crashed the economy entirely. But was it her who talked about the tofu eating wokerati? So Rolf in Liverpool's point, just up the road from you, Rolf in Liverpool's point about that having a woke element to it. I don't know that it would. Well, it must be out there, mustn't it? Otherwise, Liz Truss wouldn't have bothered coining that ridiculous phrase.
Yeah, definitely, and then that turns into policy. So you have issues of, I think the reason that things like oat milk is so expensive is that they can't compete against dairy milk because that's subsidised by the government.
Right.
And bodies like the UN are showing governments that a plant-based diet is better for the environment, but they just, I think because it's so unpopular,
and you've got lobbies, stigma. You've got commercial lobbies, but also as you've reminded us, the government's interested in keeping dairy farms up and run. Well, quite a bit interested. If it was that interested, it wouldn't have encourage them all to vote for Brexit. But the dairy issue, the dairy industry is of economic importance in a way that the oat milk industry at the moment would not be in the same way. Jacob, thank you. Lots of food for thought here. I said that with a straight face. Halfway through saying it, I realised it was a very weak pun. The nick of time, you might say. Thank you, Jacob. Emerson's in Shoreditch. Emerson, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Before I start, I'm a big fan here.
Thank you.
Listen to you every day.
You're very kind.
I mean, except for Monday. This is my day off.
Okay, that's allowed. You can always listen on catch-up, Emerson, but I fully appreciate you can have too much of a good thing.
Right. I'm a chef, and I'm a founder of a vegetarian restaurant. Although 90% of my food is vegan, but it's not intentional. So
got it.
From my customers, I speak to them every day. I go to the floor, I talk to the customers, and a vast majority of my customers are what you would call a normal person.
Yes.
They have an omnivore diet, and they come to us either because they feel like they tried new things, or they just want to feel better about themselves.
Yes.
A minority, maybe less than 5%, are vegan. And the problem, we are doing this all wrong. If you, let's say you yourself, decided to become vegan tomorrow, and then you replace your traditional diet to a fully plant-based that is mainly based on ultra-processed food.
Yes.
You're not helping the environment.
Yes.
You're not helping your health, and surely you will feel it very quickly. A change on your gut flora, a change on your mood. We are doing this all wrong. Plant-based food supposed to be based on plants.
Yes.
Surely.
Yes, not on things cooked up in a laboratory.
Exactly. And if you go to most of these vegan restaurants we have today, they are the ones who are ruining this for us. If you go to most of the vegan restaurants today, and all the food is no chicken, buffalo wings, and
Well, that won't be so much in the vegan restaurants. That will be the vegan option in
the new generation. I have a 25-year-old son.
Yes,
and what his mates eat is terrible, regardless of your diet, regardless if you are vegan or not. It's terrible. The ultra-processed food industry, regardless of your diet, regardless if it's vegan or not, they are the number one cause for deforestation today. And the solution is much, much simpler. The solution is go to a farmer's market, buy some local produced veggies, go home and cook. In a nutshell, stop being lazy.
Yes. No, I hear you. I do. I know you're not speaking directly to me, but I felt a little frisson of guilt there. So talk me through what's on the menu today at your restaurant.
Oh, my menu changes very, very often.
I'm sure.
So much to do. So we use a lentil-based cream to replace the traditional cream. So we offer both ways. We are not vegan, we are vegetarian.
Okay.
So we do milk, we do cheeses, but then vegetables.
Because if you're the chef that I think you are, I think you once said that you have butter running through your veins.
I do love a butter. I mean, what else can I take off my menu?
No, I hear you.
The solution is not. I'm happy that these plant-based meats, these vegan meats, are going out of the shops. I mean, are going bust.
Because they're a fake food, really. They're not just a fake meat, but they're a fake food.
Not just that. They are criminal. They are using methyl cellulose as a binder to glue the whole stuff together.
That's really interesting.
Methyl cellulose is also used as a wallpaper glue. So they are basically putting wallpaper glue on your food and telling you this is a good.
That this is somehow a healthy option. It is the Oliveira kitchen in Shoreditch where you ply your trade, I think.
I know that I'm going to upset a lot of vegans today, but they are my friends.
You haven't upset anybody. I don't see how you would have upset anybody. You're giving people choice and explanation and clarity. It looks like a lovely restaurant. It's in a very cool part of town, Emerson, isn't it?
Oh, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. I shall see you one day, I hope. Many thanks. I learned a lot that hour, actually. Unexpected unexpectedly in some ways, because I thought the conversation was going to go in one direction. The pre-processed packaged stuff in the freezer aisle, wallpaper paste, as we will always think of it from now on, that you get that now. This is a very different conversation from the stigma issue, which may still be in abeyance. I'm not sure. If you did miss any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also, of course, pause and rewind live radio. You'll find all of LBC shows there to catch up on, as well as the world's biggest podcasts. Pause and rewind live radio on Global Player, where you're always in control. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.